Okay, the topic I'd like to teach today is a broad elaboration of that which I did in a short shir for the dinner. I'd like to really elaborate on it because there's really a lot to talk about, and that is the concept of Adam and Sukkot. So let me explain. The Pasuk says in Tehillim, as already mentioned in the previous presentation, where it says Tehillim Ayin Vav, the Pasuk says Vahi b'Shalem Sukkot u'ma'onoso b'Tzion. And it was in Jerusalem, in Shalem, was his sukkah, which implies the Beis Hamikdash, u'ma'onoso, in his abode, where the ma'on, where the tira of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in Tzion, which is Ara Maria. In the book Kol HaTorah, written by Reb Hillel of Shklov, which was the leader of the Talmidei HaGra, which made the famous Aliyah. They came to live in Eretz Yisrael, and they actually created the Ashkenazi Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael at the time. So the book of Kol HaTorah is really about the ideas of the Gra on redemption, etc. A very important book to learn. So it writes up there in Perek Aleph, in Pishka Zayin, the name of the Gra, that the pasuk Vahi b'Shalem Sukkah u'ma'onoso b'Tzion is an inference to Sukkah, b'Shalem Sukkah, and Eretz Yisrael, u'ma'onoso b'Tzion. And he explains, because both of these mitzvahs are not a mitzvah pratis, they're not just a thing you do, but rather it's something which encompasses yourself, your identity, your personality. You are in the mitzvah. There's the same thing found also in Shem Mishmur, in the name of Simcha Bunim Fashischa. He says that there's two mitzvahs which we walk into with our muddy boots. It means whoever we are, doesn't matter. We're there. We're encompassed by our Sukkah and Eretz Yisrael. I think it's this idea that one would like to try to understand in more in depth, try to understand the connection between the Gra's inference of Sukkah and Eretz Yisrael to Beis Hamikdash. And that's what I would really like to elaborate on today in a broad form. The Gra writes in Shir Hashirim in Perek Aleph, Pasuk Dalet. He discusses, well, he teaches the Psukim, answers the famous kasha of the Tur found in Orach Chaim Tafresh Chafei. We all know the Tur asked the question that if the sukkah is Zeichel Ananei HaKavod, or even B'sukkah Zeshafti B'nei Yisrael Kipshutai, well, why would we celebrate this specifically in Tishrei and not in Nisan, which is the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim? The Ananei HaKavod left with us when we left Egypt. Why would we suddenly decide to commemorate them or thank God for them, Dafka in Tishrei? This is the question which is asked. Obviously, other people put it in a different way because in the summer it's more appropriate for Sukkot, but that's not really the question. The real question is, why have we pushed it off? Why have we pushed this off? And the Gra basically answers also this. He says it in one way in Aderes Elyo and Pashas Kisisa. There's slight differences, but this is not the place to elaborate on that. But B'cholak from his Pirush and Shirshim, he said that basically they left the Ananei HaKavod left us with the Chet HaEgel. The Ananei HaKavod were there for an Adam Mechubot, for a man who was going to his destiny, man who was going to come to Har Sinai, a man who's going to go back to the Darga of Adam Arishon of Tzofa Misofa Olam Bad Tzofa. The man who says is Rasa Shivcha Layom Mashalura Yecheskel Ben Buzi. That man with a broad scope of reality was the man which was Zeichet Ananei HaKavod, because he was at the station which would allow him to finally see Kavod Shemayim and everything and bring the world to its ultimate purpose. But then just as man fell on that great Friday of his creation, he also fell in Shivasa B'Tammuz when the Luchais and the Pasuk says, Ani Amati Elohim Atem, I said you were going to be great people. Uvnei Elyon Kulcham, and you were going to be celestial people. Ochen, but behold, K'Adam Tamusun, you will die just as Adam did. U'Kechad Asarim Tipailu, you will fall like all the other ministers, etc. You will not be an Adam Ha'elyon. This is a pasuk in Tehillim dealing with God's crying out of what happened at the Egel. And that's when we lost our Ananei HaKavod. So Shivasa B'Tammuz, if you want to commemorate the Chet HaEgel, including that also the losing of the Tzuras Adam Hashalem, the Adam of Kavod Shemayim, ultimately therefore not being the person encompassed and encircled and protected by Ananei Kavod. Well then, as we all know, the Pasuk describes how Moshe went up to beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu for Kapara. And that's what your whole Chodesh Elul is about. And finally, on Yom Kippurim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Salachti Kidvarecha. And he told him, since Salachti Kidvarecha, I want to have a constant place of Ashras Shechina in your midst. The whole idea of the Slicha Yom Kippur is, as the Ramban explains in Parshas Ha'azinu, God told them, Salachti Kidvarecha, it means to say, as you said, that the existence of the Jews as a nation, bearing the message of Hashem Echad, is basically a necessity for the world to come to its purpose. And if we aren't here, and there is no nation which will carry this message of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then there's no reason for anything to be. Ramban discusses this in Parshas Ha'azinu, Ali Pasuk Amarti Avheim Ashbisam Enesh Zichron. Salachti Kidvarecha. So I'm going to give you now a makam of Ashras Hashchina, that you should be able to constantly have this continuous experience of Sinai in the Mikdash. And then he commanded him, he told them to make a Mikdash, he said, the Mishkan as we know it. Moshe comes down off the mountain, and Yud Aleph, he was Makilas Ha'am, and he commanded them on the Mikdash. In Yud Beis and Yud Gimel, as it says, they bought for 2 days, they bought all the Nedavos needed for the building of this Mishkan. On Yud Daled, B'Tishrei, the Chachmei Lev came and they took all the materials in order to start working on Tesvav B'Tishrei. They started building the Mishkan. At that point of time, the Ananei HaKavod came back, and according to the Ramban, the Gra and Ader Sel Yom Pashkisisa, they came back in a much bigger and profounder way, without going into particulars. This is the mile of Balei Atshuva, Tzadikim Gemurim Einim Yochayim Lamot. The Ananei HaKavod, because now Adam was going to go into a Tzuras Adam, which can no more be deterred from its destiny, because we read the Salachti Kidvarecha. God promises from then on and further, you will never fall totally again. I will never leave you. V'shavta sher yashuv, that ultimately we will all end up doing tshuva, and there will be an agula asid. A man is going towards his destiny, a different pace, with many detours, but man is going towards his destiny. Ultimately, this is the Ananei HaKavod, which are then, that's why we celebrate Sukkot, Keneged Ananei HaKavod. Davka and Yud Tesvav B'Tishrei. There's no use of celebrating on the first Luchas, the first Yud Ananim. The first Ananim were there for a different Adam. And they left when that Adam disappeared with the ego. The second Ananim are for a person, the Ananim, the Balei Atshuva, and we are ultimately and going towards Shuva, as I mentioned in the Pasuk, B'Shavta Sher Yashuv. Those are the Ananim which are shaykh to us, and that's what we commemorate and celebrate. One must understand that l'chayra, this is all inferred, as the Gemara writes over there, Yishakenu Mishikas Piyu, Shir Hashirim Asher L'Shleimai. So he says Shir Hashirim Keneged Chag HaPesach. Because that night it says they sang a song, and the pasuk says Ashir Yelachem Kedel Iskadish Chag. Shir Hashirim Asher L'Shleimai, because Leil HaKravas HaPesach, which is the night of the Tesvav, the Achilas HaPesach, they said Hala. Shir Hashirim Asher L'Shleimai. Then the next pasuk, Yishakenu Mishikas Piyu, God will kiss us. This is reminiscent of Matan Torah. Matan Torah was not just God talking to man, but God infusing himself into us, as the pasuk says, Peh el peh adaber boi. God spoke to Moshe mouth to mouth within him. Did not say Peh la'ozen adaber elav. This is the idea of a neshika, of a kiss. Multiple times you find in Chazal description of Matan Torah, of being something which is a very intimate personal relationship beyond words. As the Gemara says in Shabbos, on the words Anoichi, Anoichi is a notrikon, is an abbreviation of basically of 4 words in Aramaic. Ana, I, Nafshi, myself, Kataft, Kaf, I have written, Yahivs, and I have given myself to you. I have given myself to you in a book. This is Matan Torah. Total giving of a Kadosh Baruch Hu to Klal Yisrael, a relationship which is very intimate, found in that Torah, in that book. And then you have L'reach shmonecha tovim akein ala moisa ivucha, because you smell so well that all the umas ha'olam will come to you. All the different girls will come close to you. So the Gemara says this is Sukkot, which were makav karbanis, keneged anad kipari achag, and they all come to the Mikdash. Mashcheni acharecha narutza, you pull me that we should run only after you do this, Yishbini Atzeres, which we say over there, the Pasuk says, Avi'ani HaMelech Chador, of ultimately coming to Eretz Yisrael, which is Chadri HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the Gra there in Shir Hashir. Ultimately, I repeat again, Chazor Sanani HaKaved, Binyan HaMishkan are all one, and this is Sukkot. This is probably the understanding of those things that we found in the Siddur. There's a pirush on the Siddur of Grub, of Reb Yitzchak Malchim, where he explains the tefillah of Atav HaChartana Mikol HaAmim. He starts and said that Bechir is something you choose. It's something you choose from what's available. You don't choose from what's not available. It doesn't mean that's the ultimate and the best and the perfect, but that's the best of what is available. That's Atav HaChartana. That was God taking it out of Egypt. At the time, we really didn't have much to go for. We were still pagans, we were still Ovdei Avodah Zarah, but we were chosen for our potential. Atav HaChartana Mikol HaAmim, we were chosen from all different other nations. We were better than them. It's a relative reality. Ahavta Isanu, but you actually expressed love to us, and this is Yishakenim and Shikas Piyu. This is fine, this is Matan Torah. So we elevated from just being chosen, become something which is very intimate. And then it says Ratzitza Banu. You know what Ratzitza means? I want you. The word Ritzui is used constantly in Tanakh for Kapara. When Pasuk says, Ra'isa es Ra'isi panecha v'tirtzeni, you'll be Michael me, Yaakov says to Esau. Or the Pasuk in Vayikra, V'nirtza leila chaper olav. Or the Pasuk in Yeshayahu, Ki rotza avoina. The idea of tshuva. The idea of Amam Mishnah want you, as we said before, distance makes the heart grow fonder. I found you very special and close because I thought I lost you. And then I found a new person there. That's Sukkot. V'chira, a relative relationship is Pesach. Love, Yishakenim Shikas Piyu, is Shavuos. Ritzui, the tshuva of Yom Kippur, which is expressed in the Rishkin of Sukkot, is Ratzitza Banu. Ritzui. One should probably continue and see the continuance of that tefillah to understand it and hold. The continuance and says, you elevated us from all other languages equals. You excel us better than others. Once again, it's relative. This is Pesach. You sanctified us. You made us holy. You separated us. Lashon of Taisus and Kedushin of Bezer and Bez. Kadosh Lashon Parush v'Nivdal. You've separated us. How? B'mitzvaysecha, which is Matan Torah and Shavuos. And finally, V'keraftanu Malkeinu L'Avodah Secha. When did that happen? When did God bring us close to His constant Avodas Hashem? That's Sukkot. That's the Mikdash. That's the Avodas HaKarbanos. This is all this pshat in that field. This is the Seder V'Adraga of our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Choice, because we simply had more potential. Infusing us with a personal relationship, almost losing it, then finding a deeper relationship on Sukkot. Yom Kippur through Sukkot. This is probably the pshat in what the Gra said, that Sukkot and Mikdash are one. The pasuk which talks about Mikdash, the pasuk Vahi b'Shalom Sukkah v'Noisa b'Tzion, is also an inference to Sukkot. Ultimately, as we saw in the Pirush HaGra, this is also Aviani HaMelech Hador. The final great part is Eretz Yisrael. This is probably what's marumas in the Gra, brought there in Karl HaTor. But in reality, there should be something much deeper than that, which can be understood, and I think I'm going to try to teach it now. No, the halacha of Sukkot is it has to be yeshiva ke'ein dira. You have to literally live there. That's the ikar halacha, the ikar mitzvah of Leil Tesvav is that. I mean, the Rabbeinu Hananel writes it mefurish over there in Daf Tesvav in Sukkah. When we learn Tesvav, Michag HaMatzos, it says that just Tesvav B'Nisan, Achilas Matzah is Chayva, Af Sukkah, which is Tesvav B'Tishrei, Yeshiva Ke'ein Dira is a Chayva. It's not a lach of eating in the Sukkah. It's a lach of Yeshiva Ke'ein Dira. This is supposed to be your makkah. Hikar Adin Oichel B'Sukkah, Metayah B'Sukkah, Yashen B'Sukkah. There's certain kulas which people do historically, but in whole, that's the mitzvah. The mitzvah is, this is your house. Yotzei Mediris, Kevav, Anichlas Diris, Arai, this is your house. This is Be'etzim the Agdor of the mitzvah of Sukkah. Now, one has to understand, the Gemara says in Yevamos Daf Samach Gimel, there's a member of Rebbe Lezer, Kol mi she'ein lecha avodah b'zuya mishel karka. There's nothing more buzzy than a man which is a farmer. For whatever reason it be, this is what Rebbe Lezer felt. On the other hand, Vaiter, the Gemara says over there, Rebbe Lezer, Kol adam she'ein lekarka ein adam. Remember, as a child, young boy, there was a book by a Canadian author. I think they made a movie out of it called Dudy Kravitz. I'll never forget it. It's a book of some Jewish boy living in Montreal in the what years? I'm guessing the 50s. And his grandfather, an old Jew which had come from Europe, he told him, remember, Dudy, a man without land is not a man. And he was obsessed in buying real estate. It's a whole story there. It doesn't matter at the moment. But I still remember that cliche. A man without land is not a man. And when I learned Yevamos, I chapped it's a mefurish Gemara. Adam she'ein lo karka, ein lo adam. So Taisus asks, I don't understand. If avodas hakarka is avodah bezuya, so why do you feel that mi she'ein lo karka, ein lo adam? So Taisus answers that we're not talking about the karka as an avodah, but rather karka for a house, a place. It's a place. Man has to have a sense of place. He cannot live as a Bedouin. This is a mefurish Gemara. Gemara says in Ksubas Daf Samach Vav, it's a very beautiful Gemara. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was going with his Talmidim in the road after the Churban of Bayis Sheni. So the Gemara says, here, I'll read it to you. Taner Rabbanan, Maisa Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, the story was told of Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, Shayareichav al-Achamor, was riding on a donkey. Vayayotzim Yerushalayim, he had then left Jerusalem. Vayu Talmidav Mahalchim Achav, his students were walking after him. Ruari Va'achas, he saw a young lady, Sha'isam Laketa Sa'irim, she was looking for remnants of barley, Biben Gulole Behemton Shel Arvayim, in the dung left by the animals or the camels of the Arabs. She was so poor, and there was nothing to eat, she would look for the undigested barleys found in dung, droppings of camels. Kivan Shira'ato, as soon as she saw him, she covered her hair, and she stood in front of him. Amrullah, this young girl says to Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, Rebbe, teacher, Parnaseni, feed me. Amrullah, he has her, Biti, my daughter, Miat, who are you? Amrullah, she told him, Bas Nagdiman ben Gurion ani. I am the daughter of Nagdiman ben Gurion, which was one of the richest people in Jerusalem at the time of the Bayis Sheni. Very famous Nagdiman ben Gurion. Amrullah, so Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai asked her, said to her, Biti, my daughter, Maman Shabeis Avich Heichen Alach. What happened to the money of your father's household? What happened to all of that? We know the Gemara said that the Kanoim, they burnt down all the stocks, all the mezainis that he had set aside for the siege. Amrullah, Rebbe, Lo Kedin Matlin Mitla B'Yushalayim, Melech Mamain Chasa, etc. He explained, listen, at the end of the day, whatever it's called, Vishal Beis Chamechanu, And what happened to the monies of your father-in-law? Was also a wealthy man. She said, this also went. Amar Loi, she says to him, Rebbe, teacher, do you remember that you signed on my ksuba? Amar Lahen Talmidav, he told his students, I definitely remember I signed on her ketubah, and I read in that ksuba, Elef alafim dinrei zav in Beis Aviyah, 1,000,000 dinar zav in Beis Aviyah, chutz mishel chameh, very wealthy people. Bacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai cried, ve'omar, and he said, Ashreichem Yisrael, praised are you Jews. Bisman she'osim ritzon shemakim, when you do the will of God, ein kol umah v'loshin sheletes b'hem, nothing can control you. Nothing except for Kadosh Baruch Hu. You are totally protected, you are unique, and nothing will happen. But ubizman she'ein osim ritzon shemakim, and because you're so beautiful and special, therefore you're very sensitive, and if you do not do what you're supposed to do, which is ein osim ritzon shemakim, Maisron biyad umashfela, he puts them into the hands of an umashfela, a lowly nation. V'loi biyad umashfela, you not only need the umashfela, ella biyad behenton shemashfela, you actually are, what masters you now is the dung of the animals of an umashfela. Zot Rashi, why are Vayim called umashfela? Rashi, Arvayim, Kari umashfela, they are called a lowly nation. Sheshechli ohalim heim, because they're Bedouins. They don't live in a house which is stationary. Rather, they live in mobile tents by Midbar in the desert. Here you have it clear. This Rashi source is obviously the same idea that Gemara in Yavamas. Man who doesn't live within a concept of time and space, his existence is actually like nowhere. He's not an Adam. The Adam Hashalom is existent. Existence is a phenomenon within time and space and demands from us a space and time awareness. The Jew has Kedushas Makayim and Kedushas Hazman. Esa Kedushas Haim is a Mishnah in Kalim. Kedushas Hazman is what you all know as Mekadosh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. For us, time and place are sanctified, become the hallowed bookends of existence. They demand a time and place awareness and consciousness, and ultimately a man that does not have a place loses that awareness, and he is called umashfela. There is a major deficiency in his tzelem ha'adam. This is what the Gemara says. We thus come to a conclusion. If you want to be Magdir Sukkot, it's not just a mitzvah man does. But this is the bias of this week, which is Magdir you in a certain way. You are an Adam because you have a bias. You have a certain Makayim. Your Makayim, 7 days in Tishrei, is the Sukkah. That is the type of man you are. I'd like to define what it means. Not only I'm in the Sukkah, but the Sukkah being my space defines me in a very special, unique way. Adam the Sukkos. What is this? Adam the Sukkos. You know, Har Maria, the Gemara says in Psachim Daf Peiches, was called different things. Gemara says Avram Avinu called it a Har. Har Maria. Yes, it's a mountain. Avram Avinu is a man which looks for challenges and rises to them. Climbs mountains, reaches heights, unbelievably creative, and just never stops. So his Avodas Hashem, when he looked at Har Maria, this is the capital of the mountain. This is where we all jump and rise. A second generation of every revolution demands a certain consolidation, relaxation. And that's why Yitzchak Avinu Korei Sada, the Avodas HaKodesh of Yitzchak, was Sada. It's a plateau. We're now walking it comfortably. We become normal. We move from being the Che Guevara of monotheism, the revolutionary, into let's be normal monotheistics. And then the third generation, which is called Yaakov Avinu Korei Bayis, Ein Zekim Beis Elokim V'zeh Shara Shamayim. What do these things mean? Well, let's try to understand it. You know, the Zohar Kodesh writes in Emor That so to speak, that in the Sukkot you have ushpizin. You have guests. Language there is Avram, Yitzchak, Avram, 5 tzaddikim, and David. That's what it says. Now, what does it mean? Do you actually have a guest? Do you have to set aside a chair for him? Does he eat? It reminds me of the story of there was a Rebbe in Bnei Brak that used to give an aliyah to his grandfather, which was deceased, on his yard site, and used to answer Baruch Hu, Baruch Shmai, and Amen. So they once told this to the basis of Gur. Says, I'd like to see if you can give him Hagbah. What does it mean that they're your guests? Obviously the sources in Zohar HaKadosh, so we have to understand it through the language of Zohar HaKadosh. What does Avram and David and the 5 tzaddikim mean? And when you talk in context of the language of Zohar HaKadosh. And the answer is it's a davar pashet. Those who read and know this discipline, this is basically what Chazal say, that the Zohar writes that the Avos HaKadoshim were a merkava l'shchina. Merkava means to say the chariot, not the horse. The horse is something which has its own will, but you harness it, you rein it in, you control it. A Merkava is nothing more than a chariot, a clay kibu, which has no das of itself. It's totally a vehicle of moving of the balabas, and the balabas decides what happens. When we talk of the Avos being a Merkava l'shchina, it means they put themselves down in Avos Hashem in a way that they were nothing. I am totally the embodiment of your midas of Mevah Kadosh Baruch Hu. And each Av had a certain derech of Avodas Hashem which he expressed, which was a merkava, a chariot of bringing in Ashras Shechina into this world through different aspects of their personality. Avram, the man which is expansive, running all over the place, he is parallel to what's written in the pasuk Loha Hashem HaGedula, which is what you commonly call midas HaChesed, expansive expression of the self. Chesed is described in Mar Nevuchim, in the chapter before the last, as expression without limit. It's usually positive. Actually, even fornication is called chesed. That's actually what the pasuk says, that olam chesed yibane. So the Gemara says, what kind of chesed? Could Cain had to live with his sister. He had no one else to marry. That's chesed. It's expansion of the self without limitations. Again, expansive expression of the self, no limit. That's chesed. That's a midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Avram did it to the extreme. A revolutionary, a trailblazer, bringing Kavod Hashem everywhere possible. Yitzchak is the man of consolidation. L'cha Hashem Agdula. Next word is Gevura. Eze Gibor HaKovesh. You contain, you restrain. That's real Gevura. It's called Midas Hadin. The fact that God sets limitations, the fact that God says there's certain things we do, certain things we don't do. Everything has to have a form. We separate things. This is Yitzchak Avinu, which is the introverted person. If you look carefully in Tanakh, he's not really doing all that much. Blind. The biggest thing he did is pass over the brachas. Even that, he was somewhat manipulated by his wife and son. Oh, and he reopened wells that his father had dug before. This is Yitzchak Avinu. He's not expected to express the expansiveness and creativity of God. He's supposed to express the fact that, hey, well, one must do the right thing. That's Gevura. And then afterwards we have the Chashem Agdul Vagvur Vatiferes, beauty. Litpaer, harmony, beauty. Well, that's exactly what beauty is, isn't it? Beauty is the harmonious merging of different elements. If something is just one face and one shape, there's no beauty into it. Beauty is when you have different shapes and different forms, and they merge harmoniously. I always tell the story that I once went to the Art Institute in Chicago, and I saw a canvas that was just black, and I was like taken aback, like, what's it doing here? And then I looked carefully and I realized there are infinite shades of black. And it was beautiful to see how that infinite shades of black, different blacks merged and merged and merged and almost looked like one, but they're really everything so beautifully, harmoniously merged but different. That's Tiferes. The Tikkunim writes also, Batan L'Kutei Torah, that the capability of our harmoniously merging elements into one is a function of Das. You see, whenever we see something, for example, here, here's a cup. I call it cup. There are many ways of calling it. You could call it ceramic, you could call it cylinder style, you could call it, there's so many ways, shapes and forms that one can define this by. I call it cup because cup represents an idea of taking all the different forms together into an idea. I say you are one person. Well, the person is an idea. There's actually infinite amount of molecules there. Infinite amount of cells there. Yet the idea of a person is the idea of taking all these different components into merging them to one. The Das is what makes you capable of seeing the big picture and seeing all the different things which are different into one. This is the idea of Yaakov Avinu. Man of Das, a man which translates that Das into the capability of merging a complex family of so many different children, which are all totally different, as he himself elaborates on in Parshas Vayechi, but he makes them to one nation. Maral describes and says that nest in Parshas Vayetze of the stones, so to speak, unifying into one stone under the head of Yaakov Avinu. Obviously, stones don't fight with each other, and stones do not say to each other, Allah yanuach hatzadik et rosho. The idea behind it is what the Chazal want to teach us, and this is that medrash. It's very simple. In the head of Yaakov Avinu, in his das, everything is Tiferes. Everything unifies as one. That's what you see as different fragments are all components of one great, beautiful idea. That's the idea of Yaakov Avinu. You know, seeing things that way is expressed in the idea of bias. Bias means to say a framework in which the different components merge into one. There's different types of rooms, different furniture, yet they're all called my home. The idea of bias unifies, brings all the different fragments into uniform one. Now this basic way of seeing things has a name. The name is, as the Groy explains, is what he calls Klal HaTorah, and I'll explain what I'm saying. Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos and Perek Hey, Mishnah Chav Gimel, Yehuda ben Tema Eimer As Panim L'Gehenem Beishes Panim L'Gan Eden, and then says Yiratzon Shibana Beis Hamikdash V'Mehera B'Yameinu V'Sein Chalkeinu B'Ser Asecha. So the Gemara, they all ask the question, like, what's that doing in this Mishnah? And there's so many answers. The Gemara, typically being the academic, the clear thinker, says, no, this is a typo. This is supposed to be at the end of the Masechta, just like it's at the end of Masechta's Midos, who also have their Yiratzon Shibana Beis, Tamid, Masechta's Tamid, that says that Yiratzon Shibana Beis HaMikdash, etc. It's also written here. And he explains why. He says, Tamid is all the halachas, the Mishnah is talking about the Seder HaAvodah and the Mishkan and the Mikdash, etc. So at the after talking all about the Mikdash and Avodah, we say, Yiratzon Shibana Beis HaMikdash, Meher Yameinu B'Sein Chalkeinu B'Ser Asecha. He says, but why do you think it has to be at the end of Pirkei Avos? Well, let's just understand what this is. What this means. What is Pirkei Avos? Pirkei Avos starts with Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai, Masor Yeshua, etc. As the Rambam explains, the purpose of Pirkei Avos is to teach us the veracity of the Messiah, who got from who. In order to tell us that, we want to know who these people were. In order to tell us who these people were, they tell us what their mantra was. What was that part of Torah that was their piece, was they continuously worked on, just as Avram had his midah, Yitzchak had his midah, Yaakov had his midah. What was the mantra of Hillel, of Shammai, of Shimon ben Gamliel, of Shimon HaTzadik? Now, where did they get these ideas? You think, oh, this came from Pasuk and Chumash? No, it's not where it came from. These ideas and these morals and these ethics have a source. And the source is what the Ramban says in Parshas Shmos, in Parshas Bishalach, Shmos Perek Tesvav, Pasuk Chavav. And the Pasuk says, V'ayayim v'ayayim shamaya tishma lekoil Hashem Elokecha v'yoshe be'einav sa'aseh v'hazanta lemitzvaysav. You must listen to his mitzvahs. And he brings the Even Ezra. What does it mean to listen to his mitzvahs? Lahavin tam shitzavucha lasos. What's the reasoning? What's the logic? What's the philosophy? What's the idea behind the mitzvah? Voda va'erza. I will explain this in elaboration. And the pasuk vasisa yosher adatayv. That's the words of the Ramban. What does the Ramban say there? In Parshas V'eschana and also Parshas Kedoshim, God commanded us not just to do commandments, but through those commandments to understand his philosophy, his feelings, what's right and what's wrong. God cannot command everything. God gives you a set of laws to distill, to understand its philosophical underpinnings and finally his moral ethical teachings. He says over there that hedonistic lifestyle, there's no isser to sit in, in La Marais and eat the steak and you get your face in the plate. It looks as if his face is stuck to your face. No. You know what the isser is? Kedoshim Tiyu. You're supposed to be profound people. Vasi says, Ayashas Atayv. There's no din that you have to go for compromise. But you got to do things which are right. You may be legally, technically, you won the case. But it's wrong. You're morally off the charts. An example being to this very clear, I'm going to skip a few, but one of them is Ira Nidachas. The Pasuk says that, you're going to actually go to a religious jihad and slaughter a city because they were pagan worshippers. Jews, children, according to Rambam, a young baby. And you should be afraid that you'll become callous. And the Pasuk promises you won't. I will give you mercy and compassion. You did that which is right. And Reb Meir Simcha Meshech Chachma asked, normally the language is Yasher v'Tayv. Why does it say here when you murdered a city, you don't call it Tayv, you only call it Yasher? He quotes a Gemara in Megillah Daf Yud, and he writes as follows, Lo Tayv Leila Kadosh Baruch Hu b'Mapalasan Shel Rishoyim. God's not happy with this. It doesn't make him happy. Remember, Maaseh Yodai Toivim B'Yam V'atem Aimrim Shira. God is not happy. He is sad. It's not toiv. It's the right thing to do. Not every mitzvah is toiv. Every mitzvah is yashar. How do I know what toiv is? I have to learn the total mass of halachas, to understand the sensitivities, to see the anoichi, who is God in those mitzvahs, and then you will figure out what is toiv and what is yasha. There's another thing which is negea to Rosh Hashanah. Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tov Kuf Pei brings on the Magen Avram, the Taz, the Bach, that the bracha is, we say the Shmaya Kol Shofar. That's what you all do. But the Aguda and the Raviyah say that the nusach of the bracha is the Shmaya Big Kol Shofar. And the Maron says, what are you talking about? We have to listen to what it says. We have to listen to it, to what the sounds. The Pshat and the Aguda and the Raviyah is, no, the mitzvah is not just to hear a sound. The mitzvah to hear what it has to say. Rambam tells it what it has to say. Shapru ma'aseichem. Introspection. Fix your act. Wake up. Walk away from temporal reality and see truth. That's the mitzvah of shofar. It doesn't say shofar, it says over there, Yom Teruah, Zichra and Truma. If you read the Ramban, in the Drush of the Rosh Hashanah, it means can cleave to the Midas Adin and be Mishayra for Tshuva. And then he points out that's what shofar is. Shofar is written the way Ashrei Yoidei Teruah, and the Ramban says Yoidei Teruah means they cleave Yodei Milashim V'Adam Yodas Ishtay. V'ish lo yada'a, trua is lashon din. Tere'ein b'shever barzel, God splinters us with a rod of iron, cutting us into pieces, putting boundaries. We cleave to midas hadin because we want malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what shofar is. Cleaving to midas hadin, introspection, looking at the truth, and then finally fixing it. So they say the mitzvah is the shmoya bikol shofar. Don't just hear the sound, hear what the sound has to say. And this is v'azanta lim mitzvahs of the Ramban in the name of the Ibn Ezra, means you have to not just listen to the mitzvah, but listen to what the mitzvah has to say. And that is the idea of Taiv and Yashar. The Gra writes that the midos that are written down in the Pirkei Avos are not psukim. They're the distillation of these different Tanoim, of what they saw in the total mass of Torah, what talked to them in the moral, ethical teachings that they saw in the broad picture of Torah, not in the pratim. They took all those pratim of mitzvahs and saw the philosophical, moral, ethical underpinnings. Klal HaTorah. Lashon the Gra is Pirkei Avos hu Klal HaTorah. And then he writes, but since the temple was destroyed, and we no more have a king and a government in Eretz Yisrael, Malka v'Sarea Bagoyim Ein Torah. There's no Torah. Talmud Bavli was made in Bavel. All the Rishonim, the Gdolei Achronim, the Beis Yosef, Marik, Rivash, were there in Eretz Yisrael. All the Ribui, Chochmas HaTorah, the Shach, the Taz, all the Chutz La'aretz. True. But the only place where a nation will really be able in the broad way see Klal HaTorah, when a nation sees Torah not just as mitzvahs but as a cultural reality, they will distill the mass of that information into a way of seeing things, into their paradigm, into their culture. That's only when we have Malka v'Sarea Bagoyim. Ein Torah. Malka v'Sarea be'Eretz Yisrael. When we come back as a nation and renew our national identity, and we now have a king which unifies us as a people, as a nation, we regain that national identity. Malka v'Sarea be'Eretz Yisrael. Obviously, as the Gra points out, means Migdash, and I'll explain in 2 minutes why. Then we will once again regain that broad view of Torah to distill from it the Taiv and the Yashar. Klal HaTorah, Lashon HaGra. Beis HaMikdash, we know it has basically 3 purposes. As the Rambam writes in Hilchos Beis HaBchir, Perek Aleph, Mitzvah livnois bayis laHashem, Muchan l'hakiv b'ya karbanos, v'chayim elav shalish parim b'shana. The mitzvah to build a bayis set aside for God. What does that mean? Well, the Tosefta writes in Zvachim that a bayis, a mizbeach, but without an oran, is not called a migdash. It's called a bama gedayla. Bayis laHashem means to say someplace with an oran. The idea behind it is, as explained in Moreh Nevuchim, the 3rd volume, that the purpose of the Aron is to put the house where the tablets of our covenantal relationship with God are lie within. We go there and we think about it, we meditate on that relationship, and only after coming close psychologically with awareness of that covenant, then we go and we do our karbanos. The Avodas Hashem demands first contemplating on the why and the what, and then finally the action. Bayis Hashem, and the next stage is Hakiv Ber Karbanos. But is it only for the singular person? No. This must be, the Mikdash has to be the focal point of a nation, which a whole nation rises and does a national pilgrimage thrice yearly. This becomes the focal point of your cultural reality. To engage in that contemplation, create a value system, and ultimately express that in your avodah. That's only true if we're a nation. With that focal point, we rise to it, we make that pilgrimage, and finally we find our culture. We find our identity. Malka v'Sareh be'Eretz Yisrael, through that vehicle called Mikdash, then we have Klal HaTorah. This is a basic understanding of the Gra. That's why at the end of Pirkei Avos we say that. We say here at Son, She'ibane Beis HaMikdash, B'mheira b'yameinu. And only then will we find our own subjective mantras. We'll find our understanding and our distillation of Kol HaTorah Kula. V'sein Chelkeinu b'Seirasecha. Look it up. Now come to a conclusion. This is very clear. Yes, Bayis of Yaakov Avinu, Mikdash, is a place where we finally learn how to put all the pratim together and see the broad cloud. That's the Bayis, the Adam of Bayis. The Adam of Sukkot is the Adam of the Beis HaMikdash, the Adam of Eretz Yisrael, the Adam of Malka v'Sareh be'Eretz Yisrael, Yesh Klal HaTorah. The man which is of Sukkot uniquely is the man of Koheles. We all know that. We read Koheles in Chol HaMoed Sukkot. Ma yisron la'odam b'chol ha'mola sheyamo tachas ha'shemesh. And it's interesting to see, anyone who learns Koheles sees how it's a roller coaster. It's actually, there's a book very similar to it in modern culture by Hermann Hesse called Siddhartha. A similar idea, obviously Koheles is much more profound, of a man in search for truth. A man of understanding what's it all about. Man tries this, comes to the conclusion it's meaningless. Tries the next thing, meaningless. Everything's meaningless. Until finally he comes and says, I finally understand the truth. Seif davar kol nishma, as lakim yiras b'svazav shmo kizeh kol adam, that's all that's really there. The Chazal say, Bikshu, they wanted to be Gainis Koheles, because all these yes, no, experimenting, they only wanted a finished product. But no, finally they put Koheles into the Kisvei HaKodesh. You know when this happened? At the day when Elazar ben Azariah was made Nasi. You see, Rabbi Gamliel, the previous Nasi, believed that he needed perfect students and didn't let people which are imperfect in the Beis Medrash. As soon as Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah became the Nasi, they opened the gates for everybody to come in. The Gemara says that Rabbi Gamliel saw this in a vision, that there are a bunch of boxes, kadim, but they're full of ash. There's nothing in them. They're empty. Yeah. But Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah opened the gate for everybody. Because everybody has his ups and downs, and everybody has his search. As long as they want to come to the Beis Medrash and they want to grow, and they want to find the truth, their place is in the Beis Medrash. And that's the Adam of Koheles. The man restless, searching, doesn't give up, tries one, sees it's wrong, moves to the next, until finally he comes to the real conclusion. Growth includes rising and falling, asking and failing, but relentlessly continues going further until you find it. And then you do. Sef kala Adam. So one must understand, yes, that's what Adam is. Adam is a person which on one hand, he comes from Adama. He's got potential. But Adam can become Adam El Elyon. He can become celestial. He can become profound. Kadashim Tiyuki Kadashani. That's Adam. The man who has within him the capability of thinking transcendent and abstract thought, to see the unification of everything, being the Adam of Yaakov Avinu. Demus Adam is the Demus of Yaakov Avinu. That's a Gemara in Baba Basra. Man which encompasses everything. Man has different types of children, from the sweetest and the meekest to the violent and the abusive. And they all become one beautiful nation. And Merkava l'Shechina Klal Yisrael. Yes, this is the Adam of Sukkot. The Adam of Sukkot is the man of the Mikdash. The Adam of Sukkot is the man of that Mikdash of Yaakov Avinu, of Tiferes, being broad and encompassing it all. It's the Adam of the Mikdash and of Eretz Yisrael, which is, yes, the man who sees Klal HaTorah, and is the Adam of Koheles, which does not stop searching. This is the Adam of a he, when it says, "My noisei shalom b'shalom sukkah, u'may noisei b'tzion." Sukkah, Eretz Yisrael, Mikdash, our bias. Our bias which makes us who we are. We sit in a sukkah, it defines us as the searching person, which does not just sit in the house, walking out of Yom Kippur. He now tries to find a way how to see that Yom Kippur, that Elul, into the next stage of existence. Have a great Yom Tov.